Honourable Minister Kaag, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the 4th Planetary Security Conference. The conference is organized on behalf of the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs by the think tank consortium of the Klingendael Institute, Adelphi, the Center for Climate and Security, CIPRI, and the Hague Center for Strategic Studies. The objective of this conference is to better connect our engagement for climate, security, and sustainable development in practice, to catalyze action in the so-called hotspot areas where human security is most affected by climate change and to prevent conflicts. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we have reached a tipping point where it comes to public awareness of the consequences of climate change. Over the last year, new words were invented in the Netherlands like fly shame and train pride. And I myself took quite some pride in taking the train back from the Munich Security Conference last weekend to The Hague. And in the Brussels and The Hague train stations, I had difficulty getting through because of the crowds of young children who were out on the street to protest for better climate policies. Pew Research, in its latest 26 countries study, found that climate change is now seen as the top global threats by the people they interviewed in these 26 countries. And for the first time, these public concerns resonated in the statements of the leaders gathered at the Munich Security Conference last weekend. Chancellor Angela Merkel remarkably started her speech by stating that we are living in the Anthropocene now. That is, we live in an age created by man in which the traces of man, like climate change, penetrate so deeply into the earth and atmosphere that it will deeply affect next generations. And this has consequences for global security. High Representative of the European Union, Federica Mogherini, emphasized that the nature of the security threats we face is different today, mentioning the impact of climate change on security alongside the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, new arms races, terrorist fighters, and the challenges posed by new technologies. And former US Secretary of State John Kerry emotionally called upon the leaders, telling that we are on a path of mutually assured suicide when we are heading for a 4% temperature rise in this century. And at this Munich Security Conference, I had that somewhat awkward feeling that the security perspective on climate change managed eventually to convince even more cynical national interest-driven politicians that ecology is not just about tree hugging, climate change is not about something in the far and distant future, but that we are discussing imminent threats to national security, and that we need a way bigger engagement. Against this background of increased public concern and an intense call upon the leaders to take action, I'm very proud that you people have invested for 4 years already in this planetary security community. We are proud that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was ahead of the curve and has been investing in prevention in this sphere. And by that, Minister Kaag really put her lead motto into practice of prevention and global prospects guided by the Sustainable Development Goals. Against this background, we are proud to welcome about 350 participants from over 50 countries in these 2 days conference. We welcome the leaders from the hotspot areas of the Planetary Security Initiative in Mali, Iraq, Lake Chad, and the Caribbean. And we welcome 25 young people who got a chance to contribute to the conference thanks to the PSI Youth Fellowship. We also welcome the group of journalists from the Global South, and we have a special media hub to provide easy access to their stories. And we especially welcome the increased presence of professionals with a military background. Cooperation between diplomacy, development, and hard security professionals is needed to face climate-related security risks. While the wider public and politicians in the West slowly became aware of the consequences of climate change, this planetary security community has moved ahead of the curve beyond awareness towards analysis of hotspot regions, towards practical actions and concrete recommendations, making it doable. is the title of this conference. So thank you all for joining us. We strive to learn from you and strive to inspire you to take follow-up action as much as you can. As you are here, please contribute actively, network, attend the workshops which are set up as interactive as possible, and please tweet #doable. We welcome your feedback. In the PSI app is a system to place to rate sessions, and we will send an evaluation shortly after the conference. We are very grateful to the many organizations that co-organized the 20 workshops and 9 special sessions of the conference. More organizations supported in other ways, such as the Municipality of The Hague, the European Climate Foundation, the Stanley Foundation, and our media partner, Free Press Unlimited. All of these partners have demonstrated true passion and commitment to furthering the planetary security agenda. Let me conclude with a very big thank you to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in particular Carola van Rijnshoever and Karen Arnon, for providing not only generous support, but working in a truly cooperative spirit on this project. A big thank you as well to the team that worked hard to prepare this conference that's called Congress by Design, and the Klingendaal team. I would like to ask you for a big round of applause for all of them and give the floor to our moderator of this morning, Peter Schwartzstein from the Center for Climate and Security.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I've just been asked to sort of quickly point out that we do have some available chairs towards the front, so if you are sick of standing, or alternately, there is an overflow room back there if you'd like to sit elsewhere. But thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here. I'm a journalist, and I cover environmental security issues across the Middle East and North and East Africa, and occasionally further afield. And in the last year and a bit, since this conference last gathered, it's often been a real struggle to keep up with the flood of climate-related sort of security and violence issues. In Sudan, in North Kordofan, last summer, I interviewed herders and farmers who'd been pitched into a renewed round of conflict, in large part because of climate-related stresses. It's a familiar story, of course, but as the rains get more erratic and as the sands are shifting, the herders, in this instance, who'd previously moved east-west, or sort of north-south, instead are moving east-west into the Nile Valley, thereby encroaching on the turf of sort of settled crop-growing farmers. And unfortunately, the inevitable has happened. The mismatch between human needs and natural resources has widened, and as in a number of villages have the casualty counts. In successive villages that I visited, each sort of particular part of the village had a number of dead on account of herder-farmer conflicts. Soon afterwards, I was working in Bangladesh on what was meant to be a story about dying mangroves in the Sundarbans, the large mangrove forest that flanks much of the Bangladeshi coast, only to find that there was also a pretty pronounced climate security angle here. Seriously deteriorating agricultural conditions have pushed or incentivized many farmers to ditch their land and try their luck as bandits, as pirates, sort of hiding out in the dense, sort of thickly carpeted parts of the wetlands. And that sort of piracy has been, in some instances, fueled because the amount of environmental degradation has been particularly tremendous in the farming belt, just along the periphery of the Sundarbans. And as a consequence, with more farmers there ditching their fields and trying their luck as honey collectors and fishermen, the ransom-taking opportunities for the pirates are that much more lucrative. It's become a sort of horrible, sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. And then, as you all know, in the sort of messy security void that ISIS left behind in large parts of rural Iraq and Syria, we're seeing a kind of revived terror group, a kind of ISIS 2.0, with a core of former farmers, former herders, and other former rural dwellers sort of at its center. As one local agriculture director in Salahuddin Governorate put it to me, if we do nothing, if we don't act fast, we'll never ever have peace here. It's seemingly something of an inevitability that without serious assistance and assistance beyond sort of reconstructing war-damaged areas, we will very soon be seeing additional violence in these areas. it's all getting much more complicated. And that, of course, is why we're all here. We're here to discuss the nature of the threats that we face from climate change. We're here to talk about what has sort of worked and perhaps not so far. We're here to discuss what is doable, this conference's theme. The very thin silver lining to the fact that so many people, places, and disciplines are sort of wrapped up in the climate security field is that we also have a very wide array of experts to call upon. And this morning we will be hearing from 4 speakers, each of whom in some way attests to the breadth of the climate security field. We will be having hearing brief, sort of shortish speeches from each of our speakers, followed by a brief question and answer session. I will quickly introduce them, then we'll be moving on to the Mentimeter, which some of you might remember. It's a means of sort of gauging audience participation and sort of allowing you to give your feedback on what you seem to see to be the sort of most pressing of priorities. But first up, we will have Her Excellency Minister Sigrid Kaag to speak. She is the Dutch Minister for Foreign Trade and Development Cooperation. She has very extensive experience, particularly in the Middle East. Between 2013 and 2014, she led the UN mission on chemical weapons in Syria. It is in large part because of the Dutch government's awareness and interest in the importance of climate security that we are gathered here in The Hague. We will also be hearing from Ms. Mabaranga Garasabwe, the Deputy Special Representative to the Secretary General and resident representative of the UNDP in Mali. As one of the most sort of climate-threatened and afflicted countries, we're particularly interested to hear her thoughts on what can and should be done. We also have Mr. Zheng Xinsheng, the president of the IUCN, the International Union of the Conservation of Nature. Under his watch and under that of his predecessors, the IUCN has been one of the leaders in sort of moving beyond ecology and conservation, in recognizing the perils of resource scarcity. And very kindly, at the last moment, Ambassador Hisham Al-Alawi, the Iraqi ambassador here in the Netherlands, has very, very kindly agreed to step in on behalf of the Iraqi water minister, who sadly could not make it at the last moment. Unfortunately, Minister Kaag does not have that much time, so will not be able to join us for the duration of the panel. But I would be grateful if we could hear your thoughts and then have a brief discussion afterwards. So please.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. Good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's, I think, on behalf of the government of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, a warm welcome again to The Hague, city of peace and justice, and of course to the Planetary Security Conference. Peace and justice and planetary security, of course, are intertwined and interlinked, and a warm welcome again to my colleagues on stage. And a big thanks to Klingendahl, the team in the Foreign Ministry, and other Planetary Security Consortium partners here, I believe, with me and in the audience for putting together this program. I don't know if you have the same experience, but often when you hear of a conference, but you've never participated in a conference, you're never quite sure if it's sort of internal success rating by the participants and the organizers, but I can tell by being on this stage and looking at the quality of participants, the sheer interest and the commitment, that this is a big story. But it's a big story born out of necessity, political vision, and determination. And I'd like to also credit my predecessors, Bert Koenders and Lilian Ploemen. Because, of course, if you look at the world, and I think you already quoted Angela Merkel, if we look at an anthropocentric perspective, one could qualify the last decades as a huge success, but only if you look at it through the lens of economic activity. And, of course, we nowadays wouldn't even dare to say that in such extreme terms anymore, given the reactions to globalization, the new levels of inequality that are setting in, not only in developing countries, that are quite chronic and persistent, but also in the developed world. But one thing unites all flanks on the political spectrum is the impact, the negative impact of our activity on Earth systems. That perspective, I think, is coming through loud and clear also through the conference. I don't want to list a group of experts and practitioners about all the effects of climate change that we observe, we count, we record, be it from the relentless increase in weather events, accelerated desertification, or the steady depletion of resources. And we're here to, of course, look at the sustainable solutions. Now, be it, and I think there'll be a sort of an effective list of what I know you'll be discussing in your workshops, the improving ways to enhance collaboration. How can we share knowledge between the disciplines? How can we look at innovative ways to deal with climate adaptation, moving from mitigation to adaptation? How can we deal with effective integrated risk assessments and really approach conflict analysis into our early warning systems or make it part of early warning systems? The Hague Declaration, of course, lists many of these, and the Hague Declaration, I think, in no small measure has actually influenced the debate at multiple levels. This is a success for advocacy, it's a success for collective leadership and commitment, but it also means our job isn't done, which is why we care greatly about this conference at this juncture, a few years from the signing of the Paris Agreement, a time where a number of populist leaders are questioning once more the reality of climate change, the effectiveness or viability of working internationally or multilaterally, without regard for science or the impact on the lives of many. Now, if I may quote Harald Welzer, who said, "The dominant conflicts of the 21st century are therefore global class, faith, and resource conflicts. But in the absence of effective transnational players or a monopoly of force in relations between states, there is a risk of scarcely there being any scope left to regulate these new old conflicts." This is why we have to take responsibility, of course, in the UN, but also through the EU, in all fora and levels where we can provide leadership, insight, but also solution to deal with the climate security nexus. And I agree very much with Monica, when the security teams, the hardcore security teams and leaders take stock of the impact of climate change, you know you've got a willing audience, you know you will have a budget, which is always the good news, and this is now seen to be essential to relevant international policy making. So out of necessity and the sheer risk of the threat that is yet ahead of us, lies also the capability and capacity to address the solution. A number of the solutions, of course, have been listed in the Hague Declaration, but let's zoom in on a few of them. The need for big data and integrated scenario development. Many of you who have been into development planning, you know this may sound like Development 101, but it's tough, it is very hard to get all players together, and it's even harder to agree on the baseline assumptions as well as work towards consensus-based solutions. Accurate early warning systems is different from having a early warning system. The use of satellites, observation, the capability to observe Earth, of course, and using methods, including artificial intelligence, that can actually convert big data into meaningful information and gather this in databases that provide us with applications. So I know that many of you are in an active search and research community that continuously assess, study environmental and conflict dynamics, drivers of migration and displacement. And drivers of migration and displacement not from a view, what does it mean for me, but rather how can we approach the solution, as most people that are driven off their land, out of their country, have no but one wish, is to go back home, rebuild their lives, secure livelihoods, and be part of a peaceful community that rests on social cohesion. But we also, of course, need the political leadership, the policymakers, and the journalists. But we can't do this without the involvement of the local community. And I think many a conference, and I'm delighted, I believe there's a small group of leaders, for instance, Baranga, from a village in central Mali, that's accepted the invitation to be here. There's no point to hold a conference in The Hague, far from many of the places of action, interaction, and the urgency of the solution. At the end of the day, and I look at former General Middeldorp, we need a common operational picture with the buy-in of all, and of course, with the investments that are required. But investments is more than finance. And I know in the old way of thinking, we used to think the West will pay, others will maybe beneficiary. This is a shared game. There's no one solution, there's no one decision. But technology is an input, a critical one. Financing may be an enabler, but the capacity and capability that people, data, and the willingness can bring to bear is phenomenal. I believe time, it's a cliche, but time is certainly of the essence. Hence, it sounds nice, the round circle, I'm not quite sure the green part in the middle. If we look at mitigation with a capital M, adaptation is critical, because mitigation is only dealing with situations we haven't been able to improve significantly and successfully. We need to address the approach to prevention. Investing in the Sustainable Development Goals is the only way to deal with issues of rights, human rights, and really provide for a more sustainable planet, which we all would like to leave behind to the next generations to come. And this also is the biggest singular contribution to peace and peace building one can make. All other approaches are instruments born out of necessity, as I mentioned, or when the systems have failed. But prevention with a capital P needs to be capitalized on, needs to be built, and needs to be nourished. And it is not the ambulance waiting at the bottom of the cliff. It is the policy, it is the political will, and it is working internationally through the UN and all other international fora to make this happen. Because at the UN, all are equal, and the Charter says, we the people. But on behalf of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, of course, I commit we will continue this journey with you in support of one humanity, a shared humanity, and only one planet, at least until this day that we know. Thank you very much. Thank you, Barang.
Thank you, Minister Kach. You alluded to the fact that it's been, particularly the last year or two, a sort of rather challenging setting for climate security. There have been some notable successes, particularly on a multilateral level, and yet setbacks here and there. I'd be grateful if you could sort of share with us how you feel the Dutch government and perhaps other governments like it can benefit from the proceeds of from this conference. I mean, what would you hope to see come out of this conference? How can that help the likes of the Dutch government in formulating policy?